Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Berechot chapter 6, Halacha 4, and today we're going to be getting into what happens when you have a lot of food in front of you. What are you going to say the bracha on first? And one of the other subjects is what happens if you have a lot of appetizers, you're going to eat a lot of appetizers, before you're going to do hamotzi. Well, how's that going to work for the bracha? Are those appetizers that you ate before the bread going to be covered with your hamotzi blessing at the hamotzi blessing at the end? And what's going to happen with that? Are you going to be able to? You're going to have to do two blessings on it. You have to do the blessings for the appetizers and then the blessings on, the bread afterwards. What's going to be? Well, this Mishnah is going to cover it. This Gemara is going to cover it. And there's another case that comes up. What happens if you have in front of you all the 7 species of food, and then what do you say on it first? What's going to be the order? Well, the subtext of this theme is also going to be what is going to be the order. Now, we had this argument that came up in Halacha 2. Rabbi Yehuda is saying that the 7 species is going to take preference, and the sages are saying no, it's going to be based on your preference in terms of order. So your preference is going to matter, and the opinion of the Bavli is going to be that it's going to be on preference, but Yerushalmi is going to put a little bit more weight, as we saw in Halacha 2, on 7 species. So one of the things that's neat about this is that we're going to get into a deeper understanding about the verse on the 7 species, because land is mentioned twice there. It's actually going to play into how we're going to be doing the brachas. So there's a lot of interesting tidbits on understanding the mikra for the Torah itself in a deeper way. So the idea is going to be in the Mishnah, you're going to have a lot of foods in front of you, different kinds of foods, and which are you going to say the bracha on first? So the Mishnah starts off and it says, in a case where before there's a person, there's many species of food, and Rabbi Yehuda says if there is among them one of the 7 species for which the land is praised in the Torah, and this, by the way, you can find in Devarim 8:8, and the Torah says, a land of wheat and barley and grapevines and figs and pomegranates, a land of olives, and date honey, date honey. So the notice that land is written twice there. So you'll have a land for wheat, barley, grapevines, figs, and pomegranates, and then it says a land for olives and dates. So the use of land is going to be being twice is going to be something that has significance, and we're going to discuss it at the end of this Gemara. But I just want to point that out to you now. And Rabbi Yehuda is saying if there is among them one of the 7 species for which the land is praised, he recites the blessing on it first. In other words, you're supposed to give preference, says Rabbi Yehuda, to the 7 species first, because it's mentioned in the Torah as connected to the Eretz Yisrael, and you're supposed to give preference to that. The Mishnah says, but the sages say he recites the blessing on whichever one he prefers. So the idea is going to be that, you can't do what you want, but the idea is that, you can do it on what do you favor the most. That's the idea. And you can see the Rashi commentary and the Bavli on it in 41a for more. And why would all of this be? Well, the Or Chaim says in 178-1 that the reason that you say the blessing over the food that you favor the most is because it's going to be a more heartfelt thing when you're going to be saying the bracha. So that I'm putting in, into my own words, that basically your kavanah is going to be better because it's going to be more heartfelt. And because of that, you're going to be doing a higher quality bracha. So that's going to be the reason that the sages have. In other words, that you have this food that you really love. And yeah, okay, even though you have one of the 7 species there, but you have this, I don't know, you just have this food that you really love, some melon or something, who knows, right? And you love it. Well, if you say the bracha on that one first, you're going to say it with way more intention, way more kavana, and it's really going to be an elevated offering. In other words, an elevated bracha, because you've really said it with a lot of heart. And that's really what Hashem wants from us. I mean, Hashem, we see in Yeshayahu where people are bringing offerings, but they're really not doing it with any heart, and they're just doing it just because they have to do it, but they really are missing the point about it. And that's the idea of what the sages are saying. The sages are saying that Hashem wants you to bring offerings and to bring brachas, but to do it with a lot of heart and soul, not just to do it. And if you're in a position where, okay, this one takes preference over that one, but this one you're not going to really do it with a lot of heart, sages are saying, no, go do it on that one, the one that you'd really feel it for, the one that you'd really appreciate it for, and you'd have a more connection for. That's the appropriate one. That's the idea of what the sages are saying. Now, the Gemara is gonna sort this out, and here's how the Gemara starts off. It says, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, what is the case that is disputed by Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis? In other words, what is the nature of their dispute? And the Gemara says the case of their dispute is where the person's intent to eat bread afterwards, and he's eating these foods to get his appetite started before he starts to eat the bread meal. That's going to be the condition. In other words, what Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is saying is that this mission is connected where it's dealing with wine and other dishes like salads that you would eat before a bread meal, and the Mishnah is going to be focusing on these appetizers before the meal, and then that's specifically what it's dealing with. It's not talking about a general case. It's only talking about this circumstance. And this is the magic of the Gemara, because you might not understand this nuance from just reading that Mishnah. That's why you really have to look at the Gemaras to understand what is the tradition of what these Mishnahs are talking about. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is laying it out there. This is what the case is about. It is talking about what do you do if you're having wine and you're having appetizers before you're doing the bread course? What's going to be the nature of it? How are you going to do the brachas? So in what Rabbi Yehuda is saying that if in the course of, all of these appetizers that's put in front of you before you even know you're eating the bread, you're going to say the bracha on the 7 species. That's the idea. And, the sages are saying, no, at this kind of meal, this kind of event, this kind of party, you're going to be doing on these appetizers on whichever one you do first. Now, why would that matter, right? Well, perhaps they're serving wine. Well, Rabbi Yehuda would say, hey, 7 species, wine is, it's going to be mentioned there. So you really should be doing it's really appropriate to be doing the blessing over the wine before you're eating these, salads. Maybe these salads don't even have any of the 7 species in it. So why aren't you doing the bracha on the wine before you're eating the salads? Well, the sages are saying that no, if you're preferring one of these salads and you have wine over there, you should be doing on what you prefer first. So you would be doing it in that case on the salad first, not the wine first. That's really kind of a big chiddush, but this is the idea of what this dispute is about, and we're going to unpack it a little bit more. And the Gemara says, but if it's not his intent to eat the bread afterwards, and he is eating these foods in their own setting, even the rabbis agree that if there is among them a food of the 7 species, that is the one over which he recites the blessing. So that what they're saying is that this is the only case this applies, okay? The only case this applies is if you're having a bread meal after. But no disagreement between Rabbi Yehuda and the sages if there's no bread meal that's coming after. If you just have you're having some hors d'oeuvres or something like that, and there's no there's no bread meal coming afterwards, and you have your salads and you have your wine, and none of those salads have any of the 7 species in it, well, you might really, really love that salad over there, right? But the idea here is that everybody, even the rabbis, agree that you would say it on the wine first. But if you're having the bread meal, then it would flip around and you would say it on that salad that you would prefer first, even over the wine. That's going to be the idea that the rabbis have. And then you would do your bread meal. Now, there's going to be another Amorah who's going to do a teaching on appetizers. And the Gemara says, Rabbi Abba says, one must recite an after blessing upon the appetizer course before you start the bread meal. So this idea is that you're going to have appetizers first, and then you get into your bread meal. What do? Is the bread meal going to cover the appetizers that you did beforehand? And Rabbi Abba is saying no. Rabbi Abba is saying that you do an after blessing first, and then you get into the bread meal. And the Gemara is going to comment, and Rabbi Yossi says, this teaching of Rabbi Ba, basically Rabbi Abba, it's an abbreviation of Abba, of Rabbi Ba, disagrees with the previous teaching of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. For Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, what is the case disputed by Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis? And their dispute pertains to a case where it is the person's intent to eat bread afterwards. And he is eating these foods to get his appetite started for this bread meal. And, that's what hors d'oeuvres are, right? Hors d'oeuvres sort of get you excited about eating, right? And the Gemara continues, and it says, but when it is not his intent to eat bread afterwards, rather he is basically eating these foods because it's their own meal itself, or it's its own setting, or it's its own occasion or event, then everyone, even the rabbis basically, so all agree that if there is among them a food of the 7 species, that is the one over which he recites the blessing. Now, why is this coming up with the after blessing? Well, the idea is that, if you have the 7 species, well, that's going to take precedence if, this, hors d'oeuvre sort of occasion with no bread meal that's coming after it were to be, then, in that sort of case, what would be, right? Would you do a after blessing or not? And so the idea is that when you eat, appetizers before a bread meal, he does not recite an after blessing over them, but when he's going to eat them, these salads in their own setting, of course, he's going to recite an after blessing over them. In other words, that if these are just the hors d'oeuvres and there's nothing else at this party, well, you ate that, you have to say a bracha on it, right? But if, there's no, if there is a bread meal coming up after and it's your intent to eat that, to wash and eat, well, then you're not going to say a bracha. I mean, the point of what Rabbi Yossi is saying on Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's point is that you're not going to say a bracha on those appetizers. You're going to include it into the bread meal. Gemara says, but Rabbi Ba said that he must recite an after blessing upon the appetizer course before commencing the bread meal. And basically, the idea would be that, Rabbi Ba disagrees with the teaching of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. So the Vilna Goan is saying that the rabbis hold that the blessing on a favored food is that always takes precedence over the blessing on 7 species of food. That's going to be the insight from the Vilna Goan. And the Pnei Moshe is pointing out that, according to Rabbi Bob, there's no basis to differentiate between a case where the foods are eaten as appetizers and one in which they're eaten for their own sake. and either way of food of the 7 species occasions an abridgment of 3 blessing. Thus, one cannot say that the rabbi's ruling in the Mishnah that a favored food has a precedence over a 7 species food pertains only to a case where they are being eaten as a pre-meal appetizer. So that's going to be some of the insight over there, and that if you're going to look at it that way, then yeah, there's really a disagreement on this. So Rabbi Yossi is going to try to clarify Rabbi Ba's reasoning, and basically says Pnei Moshe that Rabbi Ba holds that this is going to be true in the following circumstance. Okay, so the Gemara says this is true that one does not recite an after blessing on an appetizer, but may rely on the Berechot Mazon that follows the meal, and then the reason is because the appetizers are deemed to be subordinate to the bread. And the main part of the meal is going to basically be the bread. That's going to be, the idea. And, if that's, the case, then one would not recite a blessing on the appetizer before eating it. So, Gemara continues, says, as we learned there in the Mishnah, in any case where you have a food that is primary and subordinate, that food is eaten with it, one recites the blessing on the primary food and then discharges the obligation on the subordinate food as well. So the idea here, says the Mara Fulda, is that when the meal includes bread, the hamotzi blessing upon the bread exempts the other foods because they are going to be subordinate to the other foods. Rabbi Ba is maintaining that this should also apply even to the appetizers that are eaten before the bread because they are considered part of the meal. And basically, he's arguing that the subsequent hamotzi blessing should exempt them after the fact. Well, that's a big insight. So that's going to be a big question. Now, Rabbi Kanievsky in his Beur is saying that the Beur shiurim are the lectures that Rabbi Kanievsky gave as he went through the Shas page web page. Anyway, very good resource, and somebody published all of the notes, so you can see it. In the commentary that Rabbi Kanievsky made about the sugya, he says that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi rejects this argument, and his view, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's view, says Rabbi Kanievsky, is that the pre-meal appetizer is in fact subordinate to the bread, and for this reason, Berechot Mazon exempts it from an after blessing. As for the fact that the hamotzi cannot exempt it from the prior blessing, and this is because it is eaten before the hamotzi is recited, and one may not eat anything, even a subordinate food, before one recited a blessing. That's the insight by Rabbi Kanievsky. It looks like you have a brera issue going on here. That's going to be an argument Tanayim, a maloket Tanayim, yes brera, no brera. And so basically the argument Rabbi Abba is making is that there is brera, and this this blessing of hamotzi is going to act retroactively to fix the salads you ate before. And this argument by Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is saying that no, it's not. That you have to say the blessing on the foods first that you ate for the salads and the appetizers first, and then the bread meal is going to be its own thing, and that one is not going to fix the other retroactively. So it's this idea of retroactive, affecting things retroactively, and that should the hamotzi blessing exempt it retroactively. That's really going to be the idea. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is going to be qualifying the Mishnah's dispute as pertaining to a case where fruits are eaten as appetizers before a bread meal. So the Gemara is going to have another ruling that it will work in the same manner, and it's going to say, regarding a griz masha. Now let's look at what a griz masha is. A griz masha is a type of salad that was an appetizer. Sometimes it would be used as a snack, and the Gris Masha would take turbos beans and walnuts and dates. And you can find this recipe actually comes up in the Midrash in Tanchuma Bamidbar in Safe 21, where it says what it is. But anyway, this in the Yerushalmi, they knew what it was. They called it Gris Masha, but they don't tell you the ingredients. But the Midrash in Tanchuma Bamidbar does. So very interesting. So the Gemara continues and it says, Rabbi Yirmiyah said in the name of Rabbi Ami, one recites blessings over the turmos beans and thereby exempts other ingredients. So that's, the mention of the turmos beans in this Gris Masha salad. But, hey, what are the other ingredients, right? Well, we know that it's walnuts and dates from this Midrash. The Gemara is going to continue. It's going to say, Rabbi Levi said, this is keeping with the verse, do not rob the impoverished one because he is impoverished. So this is in Proverbs 22:22. And basically it says that, poor people are poor and they're defenseless and don't take advantage of it. It's a form of abuse and it's terrible and Hashem doesn't look good on it. And so basically it's saying do not rob, poor people. And why would that be? It would be saying that, the turmos beans are inherently an impoverished food and one should not rob it of a deserved blessing. That's going to be the idea that the Haredim expounds about that to help to explain it. And the Gemara is going to continue about it. It's going to say, until now, in the preceding ruling, we've dealt with a case where one's intent to eat bread afterwards, and in this case, he's eating the Gris Masha salad to get his meal, his appetite, ready for this meal. Or perhaps they're just, being fancy and serving it as a pre-course before they're going to sit down. Maybe there's a little bit of socializing going on, something like that. But in the case where somebody doesn't intend to eat bread, says the Gemara, this ruling that, you're going to recite the blessing on the turmos does not apply. So the idea is that, the Gris Masha does require an after blessing and includes a component of dates. That's going to be one of the 7 species. And you're going to have the abridgment of 3 blessing. And we recite the prior blessing over that component. Now, the abridgment of 3 blessing is, automatically exempts the other components from their blessing of Beurim Nefashot, since that's going to be a higher status thing. So in the abridgment of 3, turmos beans aren't going to be covered by its own thing, but they will be covered from doing the abridgment of 3 because you ate it together as a salad. And that's, by the way, I guess why the Gemara is picking out this salad, because it has the dates in it, which is one of the 7 species. Very convenient. Probably tastes good. Probably should try to make this kind of salad one day. Just try it out just to see. But anyway, since there's an after blessing on the salad that, you reserve for something of the 7 species, that food is going to be primary, and that's going to be covering the other blessing as well, which would be Beurim Nefashot, like on the beans. So in the case of the Gris Masha, it would be followed by an abridgment of 3 blessing through the ha'etz, and it would be preceded by the Beurim Pri ha'etz blessing. And the Gemara is going to follow the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, who stated the same qualification, and that, regarding this mission's discussion. And according to Rabbi Ba, there's going to be no disagreement whether the Gris Masha salad is going to be eaten before a meal or as an independent snack. So That's going to be the idea over here. Rabbi Yosei noted that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi and Rabbi Ba are going to be disagreeing as to whether an after blessing is recited over a pre-meal appetizer, and the Gemara is going to talk about an incident in which this played a role. So how does it relate? The Gemara says Rabban Gamliel Zuga. This is going to, Zuga literally means a scissor. And why would that be? Well, because he was a barber. He earned his parnasah by cutting hair or doing simple surgery. So back in the old days, barbers also used to do simple surgery. So they would do both because they had scissors. So Rabban Gamliel Zuga went up to visit those in the academy of Rabbi Yanai, and the Gemara says he saw them taking an olive to eat as an appetizer before the bread meal, and reciting a blessing before eating it and after eating it. And he said to them, do we act in this manner? In other words, do we recite an after blessing over this appetizer before you have this intention of eating a bread meal? That's the idea. And Rabbi Zera, the Gemara, sent an inquiry regarding a question on this matter to Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman, and he replied, Rabbi Kana said in the name of Rabbi Avina, with respect to the dispute between Rabbi Yudah and the sages in the Mishnah, this Mishnah, regarding a person who before him are various foods. Now, this Rabbi Kana, this is the Kana who was the student of the great student of Rabbi Yochanan. Also, Rabbi Zera was a student of Rabbi Yochanan. So anyway, the idea is that there's a disagreement on this situation where there's a person who's going to have the intention to eat bread, and there's all these foods that he's eating as the appetizer before he has this bread meal, and that's going to be the idea is that are they going to be covered with Berechot Mazon, and the sages are ruling that he recites the blessing over the food that he favors, but where it's not going to be where his intention is going to be eat a meal afterwards. You do have to say an after blessing over these foods. So the Gemara is going to say that even the sages agree that if there is among them a food of the 7 species that is the one over which he recites the prior blessing, and basically what we're getting from this, says the Pnei Moshe, is that we learn from this that when an appetizer precedes a bread meal, no after blessing is recited on the appetizer. So that's going to be the idea. Now, the Mara Fulda is going to be saying that since the after blessing will be one of the appropriate of the 7 species of food for the abridgment of 3 blessing, the prior blessing must also be recited over that food. And this is actually how Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi explained this Mishnah. Okay, so Gemara says that Rabbi Zera said, indeed, this is correct, and it can be inferred from that which we observed when the rabbis go up to the Rosh Chodesh feast. So what is going to be the Rosh Chodesh feast? Well, you can find that in the Yerushalmi and Megillah 1:4, and according to the Ran, this is referring to the feast that the Bet Din would make on the day that they would declare Rosh Chodesh, during the period when Rosh Chodesh was, a established monthly affair on the basis of the witness's testimony, where they see the new moon. So that's going to be the idea. And today, it refers to the special meal that we eat in honor of Rosh Chodesh, which, by the way, everybody should do that. And that's also going to be advised by the Shulchan Aruch and the Orach Chaim. So the idea is that, after they have this meal, they would they would be doing it. This is the practice of what the Sanhedrin was doing at the day. So the Gemara says that, it could be inferred that which we observed when the rabbis would go up to the Rosh Chodesh feast. They eat grapes before the meal and do not recite an after blessing upon them. And what is their reason? And that is because each of them intends to eat bread afterward. And they are basically the idea is that they're holding that if you have a fruit appetizer, even if it's one of the 7 species, that you're eating this before the meal, it's exempted from the after blessing by the Berechot blessing. And that's, eventually going to be recited over the bread. That's going to be the idea. And so, we are learning that pre-meal appetizers do not require an after blessing because they're going to be covered in Berechot Hamazon. But again, you have to have the intention that you're going to be eating a bread meal after. Otherwise, if you don't have the intention, then there's going to be a question on that. So, intention really does matter. Rabbi Yehuda's ruling in this Mishnah that when one has before him, various foods from the 7 species, he's going to recite a blessing over it. Now, the case that's going to be coming up is, well, what happens if you only have 7 species in front of you? In other words, you're not going to have a bread meal, but there's 7 species in front of you. What are you going to do? Well, perhaps you have a bread meal after. You still have to say a bracha on it first. So you have the 7 species in front of you as an appetizer. And the Gemara says, if there were before him several foods of the 7 species, over which of them does he recite a blessing? So imagine that you have something from all 7 species in front of you. Well, which takes preference? And the Gemara answers, and it says there in Bavel, they say, whatever species is mentioned first in the verse is first with regard to the reciting of the blessing, and whatever species is closer to the verse in the word land precedes all else. So what does that mean? Well, let's take a look. So we know that in Devarim 8:8, it says about the 7 species for the land, which the land is praised. It says a land of wheat and barley and grapevines and figs and pomegranates. And then it says a land of olives and dates. And we know that the land is mentioned twice. So the idea is that, says the Rashi in the parallel of Bavli 41a, that the verse praising the land for the quality of the fruits would list the fruits in order of their significance. So if you had before him figs and pomegranates, he would recite the blessing over the figs since they are mentioned earlier in the verse. But the word eretz for land is mentioned twice in that verse. It says a land of wheat and barley, grapevines and figs and pomegranates. And then it says a land of olives and date honey. So the Gemara explains that the significance of each fruit is judged by how soon it is mentioned after the word land. That's the commentary by the Rashi. And he continues, he says, accordingly, olives and dates, which are the first and second fruits mentioned after the second land, are deemed more significant than, say, figs and pomegranates, which are mentioned fourth and fifth after the first land. That's the idea. So in terms of order, you want to look at how close it is to the word land, and then that's how you're going to determine it. So that if you have before you, say, grapes and olives, because olives are next to the word land in the second part, but grapes are third, you have wheat and barley ahead of it, you would take the bracha on the olives first and then the grapes. That's the idea. So a lot of very important things. I want to point out that what's so interesting about brachas and what's so different about what we were talking about with the Shemona Esrei is that the Shemona Esrei is covering prayer for divine mercy. Well, that's something really spiritual. But now we're taking something that's in the material world. The brachas are on something that's material. And yes, everything in Judaism is spiritual. Judaism transforms every physical and spiritual thing into something spiritual. And every thought, every physical thing, every every element of life is going to be transformed into something spiritual, but this is taking something with material things and elevating it. So one with the Shemona Esrei is going to be something that's really just a connection with spirituality itself, something just spiritual. And this now is talking about things that are really in your hand, that Hashem gave to you and that you're being grateful for, and you're having a karat tov, and you are taking something that's material and you are tying it back to a Kodesh Baruch Hu. And that's a big difference. And it's really why brachas are so important, because it's very easy in this world to see the physical more than the spiritual. And it takes a lot of training to be able to see the spiritual more than the physical, but that's our ultimate goal as Jews. Have a great day.